Okay, well, I would like to thank everybody who's showed up so far and anybody else who shows up in the middle of this little conversation here to this breakout session, um, which I was nominated to submit it. And so somehow that meant that I'm leading it, which was not the original intent. But in any case, it's fine. So I would like to remind everybody that we'd like you to put your name, affiliation, and location in the breakout notes above, and to contribute notes to this document if you see something that needs to be recorded. We will be using a Jamboard later to do brainstorming because this is going to be a working session. So you can expect to participate through putting your thoughts down on the Jamboard, but we'll talk about that more later. I'd like to remind everybody about the community participation guidelines and how to report if you have any issues there. There are links in the notes document, which I put in the chat, so everybody should be able to see that. Welcome, Margaret. Thank you for being here this morning. So what are we going to do? I'm going to give a little introduction with Shelley, who's got an interesting story to kind of tell you a little bit about how and why this session exists. And then we'll talk a little bit about the meat of the material here, which is the idea that we might want to have something called a 5-star rating for data in regards to the kind of repository that it's in. We'll talk a lot more about that. And then we'll get into the meat of the session, which is really all about, well, is this the right thing to do? Are our draft definitions kind of reasonable? And if so, then what's in it for researchers to put their data in one kind of repository versus another? And with that, I have an introductory presentation that I'd like to give. Sarah, if you could switch over to the presentation, I may as well get going with that. Or whomever.
Oh, that's me. Okay, sorry, go ahead. Whoops. Do you want to stay up here?
Ruth, if you're able to share through your machine, that might be better because then you can advance the slides by yourself rather than have somebody else do it.
Oh, but we can do it. We can do it. Oh, there we are.
Yeah, I would rather just have you do that and advance the slides for me.
Thanks.
Because this way I can see my stuff. So you're on you need to alternate screen.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Display settings. Swap.
That's it, right? Great.
Okay,
Lovely.
everybody in here, sorry. I'm sure you'll be fine. Go ahead, Ruth.
Okay, so this is actually coming out of the Sustainable Data Management Cluster. Could you go to the next slide? And my cohorts here are Shelley, Bob, and Margaret. And the Sustainable Management Cluster right at the moment is working on a couple of different things. We've been working on item number 3, trying to figure out what repositories need to do to be fair, caring, and trusting. And we basically obviously came to the conclusion that that's a really huge task. And so we came up with these other 2 smaller tasks, which are one, working on the care practices paper, which basically takes the care principles that came out of the Global Indigenous Data Alliance and turns that into a set of recommendations for a repository, what they really must do. And that we have an outline at this point, but it's summer, so things have slowed down some, as you might expect. But we've been, working with Stephanie and her group on, trying to get that going. So if you're interested in helping work on that, you know, actually drafting a paper, please join our telecons. And at the bottom of our notes document is the next telecon date and time and stuff like that. And then the second thing we decided to do was to work on something we're calling the 5-star data framework, which is the subject of this session. Go on to the next slide, please. And their reason for that has a lot to do with Shelley. So Shelley, please tell the story you told the group that got us down this path, please.
Hello, I'm Shelley. So if you don't know me, I am, and I have a new title. This is quite heady, but I am now a vice president of data leadership at AGU. Woo! I have no cards. I can't prove it to you, but it did happen, and that's really lovely. So back in the day, there was a couple incidents where an author, so we have 23 journals, and we get to talk to the authors quite a lot on purpose, and we help them make sure their data citations are correct. There was I won't tell you which author because we don't want to shame them, but there was a very prominent PI who is in charge of a rather large project that is incredibly important to the world. And they had been gathering the data about their project with good metadata, by the way, on a website, not a repository, but on a website. And they wanted to have control of their data. They wanted to organize it in the way they wanted to, and it actually was rather well organized. And we have a policy at AGU that you have to put your data into a preservation repository, provide us with a DOI, cite it within your references, and then describe it within the availability statement, and of course, note it in methods and data and such forth. So the man said, but I have this website, I can give you the URL. And so we went into, they escalated this concern to me. I get the guy on the phone and he's like, listen, this is my data, my website, it's well documented. This was the killer. I'm like, how do I explain this? Well documented. I want my website to meet the criteria of AGU's repository because I want to maintain control of this. And I thought to myself, okay, this is not unreasonable. The fellow is working on a really large project. It technically should have its own repository. This does make sense. And maybe this is how these things come to be, because we do have project repositories, we do have discipline-specific repositories. And I said, listen, don't create a repository, because there are other infrastructures, frankly, ones that you have access to, that you could just move your data into with this beautiful metadata, get your DOIs, and then the management is over here. No, Shelley, you don't understand. This is my data from my project. I will create a repository. Just tell me what it is. Oh, crap. Okay, so it wasn't a crazy request. And I do not encourage anyone to create their own repository. This is not something I'm encouraging. But I didn't have a list. So we have OASIS, we didn't have trust yet. And I'm like, all right, listen, here, and I had to go back to our policy, and our policy was built from the Enabling Fair Data Project. So I went to things a repository needs to have. I gave them that list, and it was a starting point. It's not complete, but just bear with me. That's why we're here. And I wrote down, okay, to get a DOI, you need to build a relationship with DataCite and pay for the DOIs. Okay, the metadata has to be to the standards of your community. Do you know what those are? And I went through this whole list. It's like 8 or 9 things. And some of the people in the room actually helped build the list and gave them the how to do it. Like not only what to do, but if you're building a new repository, how to do it. And I'm like, all right, this should have been generated by ESIP. This should never have come from me directly, but this guy is driving me crazy. So, okay, here, if you do all of this, then it will be okay. Well, I haven't heard back from him, but that was the beginning. How do I explain to someone who doesn't have or know what a repository is, what it means to put data in a repository, and why that is valuable, what it is, and then if they truly have the means and the use case for their amazingly huge, incredibly important to the universe project, if they want to create their own, what is that and how to do it? Ruth, is that what you wanted me to tell? And you might be on mute, Ruth, just maybe.
Yes, I was. Of course, I always am. Yes, so that spurred a conversation within the sustainability cluster about, well, can we do that? And we sort of started down that path. We were looking at care and trust and FAIR and what repositories should do. And the problem with all of that is that you can easily get to really large spreadsheets. And so then there was this idea, well, maybe what we need is just something that's simple, that a researcher could just look at and go, oh, I'm shooting myself in the foot if I only have my data on my own website, and the reasons why are A, B, and C. And so that's where this idea of assigning stars to data came up. And it was basically just because, basically using stars to rank things is a really common thing to do. They do that for books, movies, restaurants, hotels, Medicare facility ratings, generals, all sorts of things have star ratings. And 5 is a reasonable number of, different categories you could put things into. And so the cluster earlier this year came up with some draft definitions, which I believe is on the, oh no, go to the next slide. It's 2 slides away, but go to the next slide, please. All right. And so the whole point of these star ratings would be to explain both the long and short-term benefits and costs to a researcher of trying to get to a particular set of stars. And one could also talk about, what the benefits to humanity are of each of those additional stars and what the requirements are for each of those additional stars. Though I think today we're mostly going to be talking about the first bullet there, the benefits and costs to a researcher, like why should a researcher want to have their data be 5-star data? Next slide. And so that's really the goals of the session. We want to finalize the definitions for each of our stars, and we would want the room to basically help us brainstorm why a researcher will want their data to qualify for that number of stars. In other words, basically, what do they get if they get that number of stars, and what don't they get? Next slide. And please let me know if anybody's got any questions along this.
Okay, I'm having last few.
I think you skipped one.
Yes, I surely did.
Might even be another one.
I'm a Mac girl, and this is
Windows.
Yeah.
I feel your pain.
Okay, let me start here and hope that's, I should put my glasses on, that would probably be helpful.
I think you're on like slide 6.
Slide 6, okay.
Yeah. And we're now back to the weird, oh, there's, by the way, buttons down at the bottom. You can just click them. Yeah, one more.
One more, okay. Okay, great. And hold on, team, I'm going to fix this also. Okay. Sorry, carry on.
All right. So when you guys are working through all of this, you know, some of the kinds of things you might be thinking about are, you know, a scientist's data actually, you know, it's important for them here now and as part of their legacy, but it's also important generally in the longer term, especially if it's earth science data and can't be acquired again. So there's issues of legacy. There's issues of, you know, what kind of users might find utility in the data. There's issues of, you know, what kind of audiences are going to care, and what kind of services and capabilities you're going to need in order to support those audiences. And all of that kind of leads you to, you know, what kind of data repositories should or could hold those kinds of data, and what the capabilities of those repositories are. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to want to be thinking about when we go through these definitions, and then try and come up with reasons why people want to, you know, put their data in a certain kind of repository. Next slide. Next, thank you. So this is what the cluster came up with for basically what the various stars mean. And I'm just going to quickly read through them here. Our first exercise will be to basically see if you guys think that these are reasonable definitions, or if you have alternate suggestions. I suppose it's even conceivable that you could decide that this is a terrible idea and that something else should happen. And we definitely would want to know that. I'm hoping that's not true, because if it is true, the rest of the working session will have to morph quite a bit. But in any case, basically, one star data is basically that it's really only available from that user. They may have a web page that may be something they're doing personally for their project, or it may be on a departmental web page or something of that nature. The issue, of course, being that you know, it's basically a URL to a web page. It may or may not have metadata, but because it's something that that person is personally managing, it's only going to be alive for as long as that person is interested in personally managing it. And if they get run over by a bus, that's a problem. Two, that it's no longer really under that direct person's control. It's hosted from a citable location. So therefore, it typically will have something like a universal identifier like a DOI. And these, you know, could be generic repositories like Figshare or an institutional repository. But it may not have, and probably won't have, a lot of the higher level capabilities and attributes of more stars. For example, it may not have very good metadata. Figshare, for example, doesn't really require any much title, I think, and maybe a description, but beyond that, not so much. So if it actually ends up having robust metadata, and it's citable, in other words, it's fulfilling Shelley's journal requirements, we would give it 3 stars. And then if it's starting to use standard vocabularies and things of that nature, as well as being citable and having robust landing pages and metadata, we would call it 4 stars. And then if it's really hosted by a core trust seal repository where the data itself and the metadata is fair and it's all ethically open, for example, if the care principles are applicable, then it applies those, then we would call it 5. So next slide. So you might want to think about those definitions a bit. And then the bulk of the work here, aside from deciding whether those definitions are reasonable, is to think about and brainstorm what the costs and benefits to that researcher is of achieving that star.
Mm.
And with that, I believe that's the last slide of this presentation. So we can go back to our breakout notes. Any questions from anybody in the audience or online?
Yes.
I have a very naive question, so I'll apologize for that, not having been part of this effort before, but is there risk with this 5-star branding of confusion with the 5-star open data principles from Berners-Lee, and how do we distinguish that?
It's a good question. And I must admit that when the committee or the cluster came up with this idea, I don't think we really had that in mind. And as you know, there's a lot of different kinds of 5-star ratings. So the question is what we're doing here distinct enough that it would be separable from that? I tend to think probably yes, but that's my opinion. And so, if you disagree.
Do you mean the title, like 5-star data, we could use one more maybe adjective to help in there to clarify?
5-star data repositories or something?
Yeah.
This issue's been discussed, and I don't know how many folks are familiar with that scheme, if it's really still in use. Yeah, when I saw the session. Yeah, me too.
So Ruth, the conversation was there that there was confusion on exactly what we'd be talking about here, that it would be the Berners-Lee methodology. Mark confirms, yes, that is confusing. So we probably should take a look at just the title of what we're calling this and maybe add another adjective. There's a person online. I think it's Melissa. Is that you?
Yes. Hi, that's me. Hi. So this is really interesting. I've already just a couple comments. So I also think, as Ruth just mentioned, so are we only talking about repositories? I think the answer to that is no. This is really, I think, looking at sort of a combination of practices across sort of the span of what happens with data. But let me also just mention, I see a pretty big gap between 4 stars and 5. And just as an example, the OSTP or NSTC just released desirable characteristics of data repositories for federally funded research, and they're not recommending Core Trust Seal. And so there will be, so sure, Core Trust Seal as a certification is gold standard, but the expectations of the funding agents and reviewers will be that repository deposit meets the aims of the desirable characteristics, not that it has to be certified. And so I just worry that you'll have a lot of people producing what ostensibly might be 5-star data, but it's not going to be in a Core Trust Seal repo, but one that does meet all the characteristics that you'd like. So anyway, just want to raise that point. And yeah, thanks.
Hey, Melissa.
Yes.
Thank you for starting the first work breakout exercise. This is page 1 on defining 5 stars for research data. I guess it's research data repositories. So please put your comment on that Jamboard page. Literally, this is the next exercise is to figure out, is what we're doing are these good definitions? Should we change those definitions, etc.? But I guess the question I have is everybody in the room and everybody online prepared to use a Jamboard? And does anybody need a quick tutorial? And I'm not hearing any answers.
I'm sorry, Ruth. I was getting direction from Sarah.
Ah,
Could,
okay.
could you ask, you all were listening and I wasn't. Ruth, could you just say it again so that I can catch up again?
Do we need a quick tutorial on how to put a sticky note on the Jamboard? And I could see that some people have no problem with that. But does anybody need a quick
Jamboard
tutorial
is,
on how to-
we know Jamboard, right? Is anybody not familiar with sticky notes and writing on sticky notes? Just checking. Okay, good. I think we're good.
All right, great. So if we look at our breakout session, basically we talk about spending the next 10 minutes quietly working on entering things on that Jamboard. So please start doing that. And actually, obviously, some of you are. And in 10 minutes from now, we will come back and have a summary discussion of what's on there and see if we can figure out some way of moving forward with all of
We
that.
do have a question in the room. All right.
Okay.
This is Jonathan Blythe. I just wanted to mention on the previous discussion on the 5 stars that there's the CMMI has 5 maturity levels, and that might be analogous to what you're doing, but you'd have to map it to their framework.
Yeah, I personally, I do have a lot of experience with the CMMI capability maturity models. So I'm certified in their data management criteria in case anybody cares. It really is quite different because that is an organizational assessment methodology, and where number 3 is super awesome, 4 and 5 are for like going to Mars. So it is a kind of a different measurement on your organizational maturity. Yeah, so I think this is more simple, but if you're all about CMMI, I'm happy to wax poetic over coffee.
And I would like to note one more thing, and that is people keep mentioning and then putting in the chat. We'll try and capture the chat and get it into the notes. But if it's particular to, I don't know what a +1 means, but if it's particular to a particular page on this Jamboard, could you put it on the Jamboard? Like, Melissa, it would be great if you put that White House document, right on this page of the Jamboard.
Will do.
That's a good reference. And we do have another question in the room.
Ask away.
This is Abby Benson, and I was thinking about your, the benefits or the researcher benefits, and we have a primer from the Biological Data Standards cluster that I think we tried to get at some of these benefits, and I'm just wondering if there's some crosswalk or mining to do there between that product and what you all are doing here.
Yeah, if you can put the link on,
The benefits are separate slides, so I just wasn't sure where to link to the primer in your Jamboard.
Ruth, do you want to answer that?
If you're talking about the whole concept, which I think you are here, in other words, doing a mapping between this concept and that concept, put it on the first page.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for offering that. I'm excited about it. So are you in the notes document? Okay, this notes page. Ruth, is the notes page linked in?
It's linked in the SCED and in the Chico chat. But if you need a link to the notes page, I can put it in a. Well, I already did put it in once in the chat.
Yeah.
Zoom chat.
Are you in our Zoom by chance? No. Do you want us to email it to you? What's your email? Hang on, we're getting a Bitly. A Bitly is about to be made. Oh, nope, it's being fixed right now. Okay, are we good? Okay.
Okay, so I see a lot of cards showing up. That's great. I even see a lot of a few +1s on a few of these. That's great as well. Just note that +1 means I agree with that one. So if there's a couple comments that you think, oh yeah, I should have written that, please put your +1s on it, because obviously the more people who think that that's an important thing, obviously, to me, that means that's something we really should look at, as the committee prioritizes its work.
Does anybody in this room still need a link to anything? No, okay. If you secretly need,
Whoa,
just tell Sarah.
who's moving? Stop that.
It is easy to move that by accident. Just ignore it. And if you want to scoot it off to the side, whoever's, just scoot it off to the side where you're adding stuff.
Oh, wow, you're doing the next set of pages too. I love it. It is a working session. If you're tired of this part of the session, you could go on and work on the next part of the session. I'll just give people a minute or two more. I sort of waiting for the number of cards to stop increasing.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, whoever. Jackalope or whomever. So just remember, we do have 6 pages to the Jamboard. It's no problem if you just feel like being part of all of the yellow sticky notes here and you're feeling warm and cozy, no problem, we'll figure it out. However, if you're very metadata oriented, then if you're making a comment on a single star, you could go to that page and put it there. But if you're not feeling metadata oriented, which this room wouldn't ever feel that way, you can just hang out here in the coziness on the first page.
And I see comments still being added, so I think we need to leave this page live for a while.
I think so. Oh, we have a hand up. Yes, question?
I just wanted to clarify, user is being used as the person submitting or generating the data that needs to be managed, not people who are
Only
then using
available
the data.
from user. So
it's
you're the first star, the definition of the
Yeah.
first star.
Right. We could probably change that word to be only available from researcher or PI or something like that.
Data creator.
Data creator.
Yeah. And feel free to put that in a sticker. No, it's real. It's real. And if you're freezing, it's okay for you to jump up and down, wave your arms around, whatever you need to do. I don't know why I left my jacket in my room. I'll be going to get that later. Not now, Ruth, don't worry. I won't leave now.
Good.
By the way, more people showed up, Ruth.
Yay.
I sent you a picture of the room.
Really?
I did. Oh, shoot. Oh, look at this.
Oh, cool. I got your picture. Hi, everybody. I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad you're commenting so heavily. So while people continue doing this, I see the things that seem to have the most upvotes, if you can call them that, as the official stars could be misunderstood as community ratings. I'm not quite sure what to do with that, because that means that in the definitions, we would have to be very clear that these are not community ratings, but that these are, you know, criteria. And I saw somewhere on here, I don't know if it's been upvoted, but you know, about who's making the decision as to how many stars various things get. And that is a really good question. Obviously, it needs to be, for the earth sciences, I would think that would be the ESIP community in general. But you know, that the point is that this is meant to be a community process, and it's only going to, you know, work or not, depending on whether the community is supporting it or not. So, you know, that would be the reason for trying to get your input here.
So,
okay, so
yeah. To that thought, so do you mind if I riff a moment?
Riff away.
Okay, cut me off when this gets boring. So the first star is, it's not a preservation repository. It's somewhere else. And we hate this, but it's real. So we probably should be like a frowny face instead of a star. The second one, hosted from a citable location, this is Zenodo, it's Figshare, it's a university repository where there is no metadata. So the reusability is very difficult, if impossible. So again, two frowny faces, this still isn't good, but it does have some benefit. It exists, as opposed to being on a website that could be deleted. The third is, you're not much better, you're still citable, you could still be in Zenodo, but you have some good metadata. How it got created, we don't know, because it's not necessarily standard metadata, but you've got something there that's useful. Okay, and then we're heading into the fourth star. Now we have standards. We have standard metadata, we have standard vocabularies. This is fantastic. You are probably not on Zenodo anymore. You are probably now in a domain repository. So 3 could be a domain repository, 4 is definitely a domain repository. And then 5 is a unicorn.
Actually, I like that characterization, and I'm actually thinking that it's a good thing this is being recorded so I can scarf some of those words, because, you know, we currently just have these really probably pretty bad generalizations is what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 star mean. I'm not sure I like going from 1 frowny face to 2 frowny faces is being better. It might be the first one is 5 frowny faces, the next one is 4 frowny faces and 1 star. And you get down to
this is how we'll deal with the 5-star problem. It's the least amount of frowny faces. We fixed it.
I actually kind of like that, though it, you know, probably seems a little silly, but you know, I do like it. Anyways, if you like that idea, you might want to upvote that. Okay, so that was this official stars issue. The next most upvoted thing seems to be, yes, many of these things seem to be independent aspects, not cumulative. And they're talking about making this a multi-dimensional thing more, that you know, you get a star for an element and then you add them up.
Oh, thank you, frowny face.
And and that could be true. That's something I think we've had an issue with. Oh, I like whoever's doing that. Though you have to be able to subtract frowny phrases and add.
Well, and so also thinking about, like, we all have vocabulary, like we all know, and what I mean by that is the way we talk here at ESIP is not how a researcher talks. Like, we all know that. So this, by having these criteria, we want it to be meaningful to a researcher where we're not using our vocabulary. We can help them see why it's important. I don't know if that helps. Going multidimensional is not helpful. We need to keep it simple.
Right. Yes. In fact, I think that's the key. Keep it simple. And I would even add the word stupid.
Scientists, keep it simple, scientist. That's the word you were looking for. I know it.
Oh, I like it. Keep it simple, scientist. Okay, cool. So I guess there's a couple of 3s on here. I do know that people are still adding things to this page.
And we're not even looking on the others. Do you want to? Oh, it looks like we added a page.
Oh.
7th page now. I can't wait to see what that was.
Okay, but I do note that we're way over our 10-20 minutes here, including the discussion part. Is anybody going to vote any of those frowny faces?
I think, show of hands, are we good on the, no. Oh, Karen, you have a question? Sarah, do you mind helping me with thank you.
If we're doubling down on the frowny face idea, instead of the number of frowny faces, you could go from a angry frowny face to a sad face to a flat face to a little smile to a big joyous stars in your eyes.
There we are. And then what would that be exactly? 5-star. I feel like there's a lot of like patriarchy happening here with, you look so much better when you're smiling, you don't want to like infer that. And then we have a Me Too movement. Okay, very good. Yes, we'll consider that.
Wow, this is getting complicated.
I'm sorry, I diverged.
No, I understand your concern there, though I also have to say that I kind of like that idea as well. But I agree that it does have issues.
I'm happy to go to the AGU design people and say, hey, can you fix this? And let them give us an answer. They magically come up with lovely things, so I can go ask.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh, we have another question.
Probably another naive question. Where do these stars or frowny faces live for this criteria and the other ones? Are they going to be on a landing page or in the search, or where do you display these? Is that too far beyond what we're looking at now? Or?
Yes, I mean, at this point, we're working on the can we get some categories? So I think the clusters idea would be, basically, this is coming out of ESIP, but, if this were to take hold, it would have to be socialized into a much larger community, right? So I think the first output here would be some sort of white paper / position paper / I don't know, even journal publication, who knows, describing what this is, why it's important, and what the stars are and what they would mean for researchers. So I think that would be sort of what I thought the first output would be. And implementation would definitely, probably take some time and probably involve morphing what this community finalized or, came up with, into something, that generally is understood. So I'm not sure that there was ever an attempt or the idea that we would actually say Figshare is 2 stars, because some Figshare data sets might be more than 2 stars. If they really put like really good metadata in there that's in a standard format, and they had all of that other good stuff. So I don't know that there was ever a thought within the cluster of actually grading individual data sets this way. I think the main hope here was to help the Shelleys of the world when they're having conversations with a researcher who wants to create their own website, and making it easier for them to understand why that's a really bad idea and bad for them in terms of their own long-term, you know, what they're going to have to do to maintain their data and what their legacy is going to be. Because, you know, a scientific legacy, one would think, would be something that a researcher would care about, though I think that in many cases, it's not even something that they think about at all, because they're, you know, kind of stuck on the whole, can I survive the whole tenure process and that sort of thing? Or am I going to perish because I haven't published as many things as I need to yet? So that's where I think the cluster's head was at. So all these implementation details, I think, are like way out there in the future.
But it is interesting to think about perception. Like,
yep.
For instance, I would not want to have a frowny face in my repository. Like, just don't. So where would we do that? Yeah. And I also don't want to discount the fact that Zenodo is an incredibly important service for our researchers, but it comes with choices.
And Zenodo is sometimes the appropriate place for some kinds of data. If it's not the kind of data that, you know, you're ever going to be able to aggregate with other kind of data and turn into a more global thing, or, reuse in some way. I mean, there is data of those types, you know.
So we have another question in the room.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, are these stars ranking a repository? So if a repository has 100 entries that are 5-star standard, but one that's entered at a 3-star, is the repository a 3-star repository? Or are you rating data sets? Like a repository could have 99 5-star data sets and 1 3-star data set.
Good question.
And I would say that, for example, in the story that that Shelley gave us, where the guy was doing everything right, except for it was his own repository, so it really didn't have any kind of longevity. You know, that there is some mix of capability and repository type in the ratings as they currently exist. In other words, at the 1-star, there really isn't a repository, and it may have good or bad metadata, but it isn't really a repository. It's something that will go away unless that person does something massively time-consuming and work involved to, somehow get that data away from his website and into a real repository, which at the end of a project is not something that typically happens. Whereas you can't get really many of the upper level stars unless it is in a repository of some sort. In other words, not owned by the user themselves, but in some kind of repository that's going to preserve those bits for the future, even if the meaning of those bits isn't really well documented at kind of the 2-star level. Though going up to, the 5-star level would be really well documented.
Yeah.
So it's a mix.
I'm coming from the standpoint that I curate an institutional repository, and I'd say probably a majority of my users are trying to reach the minimum bar for their federal funding, right? Most of them are just looking for a DOI and a place to store their data where it's accessible, it's backed up, it's citable. But I do have researchers that go the extra mile to make extensive metadata and machine readable XML, and their data sets I would consider 5-star, but my repository in general is not a 5-star repository. So I'd hate for my repository to be, 1 frowny face or 3 stars when I have excellent products inside that repository.
That's a really good point. And we do not want you to feel that way. Like, that is not the purpose here. So I think positioning this really matters. And as you're talking, I'm like, oh, we did not come at this right, because we don't want that to happen. And I wonder if, Ruth, I wonder if we can frame it like this is a tool for researchers to know what they're shooting for. And, this is better and this is better. And I don't know if it's going to ever equate to like 5 levels, but maybe we can say, well, this gives you a +1 and this gives you a +1, and maybe give it a different construct so that we can. So it's not necessarily the repository they're looking at, it's the services of the repository and what's possible. Either they do it or the repository does it, but you're achieving a better result no matter what repository you're using if you make sure the following happens, to-doom, to-doom, to-doom. So it would argue, Melissa's online, it would argue that we don't say Core Trust Seal is the 5th star because the researcher can't control that it's Core Trust Seal certified. And we reorient the argument to what can the researcher control and what choices can they make? Wait, there's a lot of head nodding in the room, by the way, on that. And hands went up. The gentleman over here.
Can somebody note that down? Because I think that was important to capture.
Okay, who's sticky noting? You're on the sticky note for that. And tell me what your name is again? Andrew, hi Andrew. I don't care where you put it, just say the most amazing thing Andrew said today. Boom, 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 just, yeah. And if he doesn't type that, somebody fix it. So it says the most amazing thing Andrew said. I'm kidding, you don't have to do that. Sir, go ahead.
So building on that point you made, I don't know if this will be a popular idea among repository managers, but thinking about star ratings, you see a restaurant and you want to go to dinner and you find a place that's 4.8 stars with 100 reviews. That's pretty amazing. That's a place you want to go out. Obviously, it's consistently high ranked. If each data set had its own star ranking and you had an average for a repository, that might not be popular again, but does that push a repository to do better, to demand better? And there's like a composite rating for the repository and an individual rating for data sets.
So I would argue with you that, so that's lovely, but I think our purpose is not to encourage, like there's other people working on, oh, let's make our repositories better. Let's walk over here and say, let's help the researcher understand why we're having this conversation with repositories and what the benefit is to them. So that's an interesting thing to think about, but I would not, like the researcher can't control that. They have what they have.
I agree with that, Shelley. This is Mark Parsons. I don't think we should be talking about rating repositories at all.
Yeah.
There's lots of efforts going on that, and repositories are taking that, and repositories might make conscious choices to have higher levels of service for certain data sets and than other data sets, and that's a valuable, good thing to do, and they shouldn't be penalized for that. Just because publishing 1-star data is better than publishing no data. So this should be strictly focused on the data that a researcher has produced that they need to cite in a journal.
Yeah.
And so so that we can explain to them, here's what you need to do to your data. And I don't think we should throw out Core Trust Seal, but it shouldn't be just Core Trust Seal, in a certified repository, I don't know how because the whole issue on this ultimately is going to be assessment. Who does this? Who makes these opinions?
Yeah, and how would they know?
Particularly level 5. I mean, there's infinite community conversations on how to assess what fair means. And people bandy it about, way too loosely. So I think we should really scale this back to simply so a researcher understands what they can do to make their data better, more persistent, more citable, et cetera, and keep the repository issue off the table.
Okay, I like that. And you argued that Core Trust Seal coming back in for the 5th level, and I think that's because a researcher has no idea how to evaluate a repository, but if they look at a certification, they go, oh, somebody else did.
Yeah, and there's other certifications too that I think would be equally valid.
Yep. So. Okay, so that's interesting. So I would retract what I said earlier. So, okay. And Abby, right? Isn't it Abby? Abby has a thought.
Okay, so bringing back the primer in again, we tried to address this from the point of view of a researcher and why they might want to do these various things. So we ask questions like, do you want to make your data internet ready? And then we provide a value proposition for why you might want to do that. It ensures your data are programmatically accessible so it can be shared online. And then we have, for metadata, do you want to provide context and understandability to your data? This ensures your data are reusable so that yourself and others understand how the data were collected and who to contact for more information. And so we took it as, we took this from a different point of view rather than giving stars to things, because we did initially start from that point of view, but instead providing the value propositions to researchers about why they might want to take it to these other levels.
Interesting. Yeah.
I think basically what you're saying is that whether or not biological data standards primer, that red thing down there in the corner, gets any other votes, I think the cluster needs to look at it carefully.
Yeah, I really like what Abby said. And the other thing to note is, really putting it from the researcher's perspective. So we know, for example, that papers that cite data get more citations themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge incentive. So because they may not care about their data reusability, but they do care about their paper getting cited.
Yep, that's a huge one. We could really use more research on that, by the way. I know of one paper. Do we have any more?
Yes, there were several papers that had that conclusion in various and sundry fields. And
Right,
I forget his name.
We should have that. I know of one, but it would be great to collect those. We have another. Pass it back to Rose, please.
How does this match up with the data management planning?
Oh, I would say not at all. Well, so except for the fact that when you're choosing a repository, you have to report that in your data management plan. And some funders are asking for particular kinds of repositories. So, I mean, it could, yeah. And Mark just said, if you have a good plan, you have good data. Is that what you just said? Yeah. So I guess we could.
Often you could rate someone against their plan. You get 5 stars if you accomplished everything you said you would.
Oh, Raleigh, are you here? Okay. All right, you don't have to answer this because I don't want to put you on the spot. However, since you're here, so Raleigh is from the National Science Foundation, and he's a program officer. He's not my program officer, I don't think. Let me double check. No, I don't think so. Okay, so maybe I can actually ask you this question. So if you get a data management plan from a proposal, you have probably some criteria to take a look at it. If we recommended to you using whatever this will end up being as a best choice from the researcher, do you see that as potentially valuable, not that you would adopt it, because I don't want to put those words in your mouth, but do you see that as potentially valuable to help a researcher realize to make the best choices?
There we go.
That's better.
The important context for the data management plan is that it's kind of a prospective document at the outset of the research process. And the goal is to convince a reviewer of a proposal that you have a good plan in place for what to do with your data that is, compliant with the relevant policies. And so, insofar as there are community guidelines out there that can help to inform what are, the best practices and that the plan is aligned with that, then yes, it could be helpful, whether, this type of rubric would specifically be applicable to the evaluation of the data management plan, probably not, but having that sense of kind of community best practices is important and helpful.
Okay, so in general, yes, it's helpful. It's not necessarily something that would be used by the National Science Foundation, but okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that puts it into context as to why a researcher might find this valuable to help them make a decision on which repository would be the best response. So yeah, I think that you've argued there is a good connection.
Cool.
Thanks, Raleigh.
So I know we have a half hour left in this session. And I think we've had a lot of really good discussion on this first page, but I do note that there are notes on a lot of the other pages. And I, for one, would be interested in just being able to peruse some of them. Is that acceptable for folks? I mean, clearly, if you have other thoughts on the idea in general, you should put them on this first page, but I would like to see what kinds of notes have come in for the other pages here. So if you could bring up like page 2.
Page 2. So the 1-star page.
Yeah. Okay. No repository. What about it? Well, describe it, but the data itself is only available on request. So that's so that's kind of combining what we had as 1 and 2 stars together, because
so it's embargoed. I think that's either embargoed or it's sensitive. I don't know who put that in there, but does that sound like one or the other? Not a one person moved their heads. Not sure who put the blue in there. There would have to be a reason. Like for AGU, we don't allow embargoed data. So this would not be okay for us. We would say, I'm sorry, you have to make your data open. If you're publishing research that uses this data, you have to make your data open to evaluate the research, period.
Yeah, Dataverse allows you to do this if there's an ongoing study that's still using part of the data. That's
okay.
An option in Dataverse repository.
Okay, so it's technically possible, but
so actually you wouldn't be able to publish on it in an AGU journal, but it would be in some repository that has a embargo, or it could be on a person's. I mean, there are other fields that I am aware of where there isn't yet the requirement to really put it in a real repository, and that it's generally considered acceptable that the data be available only on request. In other words, if you don't ask the researcher for it, you won't get it. And that just points out how
varied.
Yeah, we need to. I think this has been and it is in our cluster a question of how do you categorize things, since the total number of options is really kind of infinite, but we want to make it as simple as possible for a researcher to to try and do the best thing that they can for their particular data.
Yeah, thanks for the person who just added that we really need to just allow protected data as described there to be kept protected. I mean, that's just the law or the practice, like fossils and indigenous locations that need to be protected and such. Yeah.
Well, and it's also responsive to things like the CARE principles, which
Yep.
the group is also working on, right?
Yep.
So yes, I'm glad somebody put that in.
Yep. Yep, and to the second bullet, the second sticky that just popped in is, you don't want one person responsible for the data such that it is on my laptop, right? It goes into the care of a repository where the access controls are in place and the protocols. There can be a protocol for access.
Right.
Preferable. Yep. Thanks for that.
Okay. Right. So I'm just reading some of these red cards. I like the fact that people are actually using color here.
Look
Yes.
over on the far right one, the citizen science data sets produced by government sponsored projects. We're building, we have a new community at AGU on citizen science and a new journal, which we're super excited about. But one of the things I haven't dug in too deeply on is, where is citizen science data stored? There aren't very many repositories for citizen science specifically, and there's not a lot of guidance specifically for citizen science. By the way, ESIP. There's an
Great.
opportunity.
But I would note that actually, if it's citizen science, but it's biology, it should go to a biotype repository. And if it's geology, it should go to a geotype repository. I mean, why does it have to be different?
Love that. Love that. Thank you. Go ahead. Mark has a thought.
Who sets up a citizen science project without a place for the citizens to submit their data?
Fundamental question.
So, I mean, does that happen? Have you experienced that?
Let's just say I've not researched enough to answer you, but when I go hunt for citizen science repositories, there's a very short list.
Well, yeah, because there's nothing, citizen science data shouldn't be put in another category. It's science data produced by people. I mean, it's so.
So interestingly, I have a friend who's doing who's a musician capturing video and audio about to capture video and audio in the wetlands, the Bologna wetlands near LA. And because he's my friend, he's like, Shelley, what do I do with my data? And I introduced them to EDI. No idea who EDI was. Margaret talked to him, and they have a relationship. By the way, he almost has his grant, Margaret, so he'll call you back soon.
So you're not talking about where an average citizen goes off and sort of does some science on their own, rather than like participating in the Galaxy Zoo or the National Phenology Network or any.
It can happen. Okay. I mean, he's so excited. He's going to take image stuff, visualizations and sounds to do an immersive virtual reality experience. So it was artistic, but it will be every single day in the entire life cycle, 1-year life cycle of this wetlands. And he wants people to fall in love with the wetlands so they're more likely to protect it. But it's also really great science data.
So it's just data. I don't think we should care about the qualifications of the person.
I agree with you, Mark.
Yeah, but they don't know where to go.
Yeah, but that's the same problem as a researcher might have, whether they're highly credentialed or not. It's the same problem.
You're right. You're right. Fundamentally, yes, that's correct. Yes. So my Google search was erroneous, is what you're saying. You should not have said citizen science repository, Shelley. You should have just said repository, and guess what? We come up with the list. Okay, fair. And the humor is not lost on me.
And I just want to answer the question in the lower right-hand corner. Yeah, it shouldn't have said DOIs. It should say, PID or something like that, permanent identifier. In other repositories, DOIs are a fairly recent phenomenon, and if you've been around for a while, you have identifiers that probably go back 50 or 100 years or more. and yes, those are real identifiers and count. So yeah, I agree with you on terminology there on that one.
So we go on to the 2-star?
Yes, please, because we only have 20 minutes left. And I do want to spend some time going over our 3 things that we're learning here.
If we only have a couple of minutes, I kind of want to go to 4, because I was struggling with 4. I don't know. Does anyone want to vote up or down 4? Yeah, we have one thumb, a thumb, 2 thumbs, 3. There were 3. We're going to 4. Okay.
That's fine by me.
All right, here's 4. So what's the difference between 3 and 5? May or may not be 4. So go ahead, Ruth, riff on.
Well, there aren't any upvotes on this one, so it's kind of hard to know.
So
Yes, it's true.
standard vocabulary is hard. So
Yep.
we know we're not doing that well for researchers to consume. And my personal opinion, and Margaret knows this, is I really feel like if you pick the right repository, you solved your standard vocabulary problem, because they'll help you. So maybe it doesn't belong in 4. Of course, that could be like a whole ESIP meeting by itself, but I just.
Yeah.
Madison has a question. Okay, maybe I should retract that and not cause a whole issue.
More of a comment, I suppose, because I noticed that, like, standard vocabulary, if there is one for a repository, that means that repository is a domain repository. And so instead of it being standard vocabularies, maybe the next step, this 4 one, is that it's in a domain repository, so it can be kind of found alongside other similar types of data.
Oh, that's a great way of saying it. Okay.
Oh, I like that. Please put that card in.
It's already there.
Thank you.
Okay, I can't see it yet, or I haven't read that one yet. There it goes.
Yeah, I think it's the orange one.
Okay.
So I don't know if this is beyond the scope of this discussion, but as a data manager, I would be interested to know how you convince someone to get to 4 or 5 stars. Like walking up to a researcher that's busy, that's comfortable at the 3-star level, what's the carrot you dangle them to get to 4 or 5 stars?
Okay, is Raleigh still here? Yeah, so you don't have to answer, I'll answer for you. So we convinced Raleigh to put the requirement for domain repositories into government funding. That's the carrot. Oh, now he wants to talk. So Shelley, no, you can't put words in my mouth. I really do think we need funders to help us, though.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just adding another point that we raise with proposers to NSF is that there's a section of your proposal where you describe results of prior support. And I do think, mentioning within prior support, hey, this previous grant produced a data set that was rated 5 stars. That, is a demonstration that you've well utilized previous federal funds that, will be considered by the reviewers. So I see that as an incentive.
Yeah, yeah.
So I note that data citations actually are becoming a real thing. For example, I have a data set personally that has more than 100 citations, which I thought was pretty good for a data set. And, the only way you can get a data set cited like that is if it is actually available somewhere in a way that people can get it and use it. Otherwise, they're not going to cite it. So in some sense, that is, how you get to 4 and 5. And the reason why that particular data set I'm talking about has that many citations is because I think it is a 5-star data set. It actually has lots of services.
I'm gonna go to
good
5.
metadata.
Ooh, there's the least number of stickers. Did you mostly agree with 5? Nobody's head moved. Not a soul. Okay, one head went up and down. Someone just looked down at their computer, so that was kind of an up and down.
The other reason why I think people
Not really strong.
might go to 4 and 5 is if they recognize that the work that they're doing contributes to a global picture of something, and they want to make sure that the data that they're creating will be able to be, used in that global sense. There are people who do that kind of work.
Yeah.
And at some point, some communities just decide that this is an important thing. We need to make all this data, globally accessible. And typically they go after a grant to do that. But but that is a reason for getting to 4 and 5 as well.
We've got a question in the room.
The Geospatial Data Act, I think I'm citing it correctly, there's a requirement that before government agency goes out and procures more data, which means research, before they do data collection, they have to ensure that the data is not already available. And so you can't meet your Geospatial Data Act requirements unless you have your data in a repository where it's discoverable and reusable. So I think USGS considers all their research data to be geospatial just by, I guess, by edict. But so yeah, other agencies might, like NSF, might make that conceptual leap as well. Maybe that's one of the criteria here, is that it should be, you know, the research data, all earth science data is geospatial. Therefore, you know, it should have, you know, the qualities of geospatial data and be in a marketplace where you can discover it and reuse it.
I love that. Can you, I don't think it's here, but could you put that note there? Because that's a really great motivator for a researcher.
And there's a statutory authority to do this.
Yep, please do note that. That is brilliant. I did not know that. Maybe I did, but I've not said it enough. And there's another question in the back, but Andrew, I want you to, I want to ask you a specific question. I'm going to give you a chance to think. For your repository, what does 5 stars look like? And what would we have to adjust? So that will come back, just think. Gentleman in the back.
Yes, the Geospatial Data Act of 2018 is something I happen to be more familiar with than I would care to be, probably. The Geospatial Data Act only applies to covered agencies, and I believe that NSF and Department of Defense and a whole slew of others are not included.
Really?
As a minor technical legal detail, but
Damn it.
the concept is still there. So.
How many people know that? Can we just take that out of the recording? Never mind, I don't mean that. Okay. It should be a best practice. We could at least call it a best practice.
Yes, I just figured.
Here it's a law, here's a best practice, go team. Okay, all right, fair. Thank you for making sure that we did not get into a legal sticky wicket. Karen has a comment up here.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that while we all want to move towards data that's, you know, in core terrestrial repositories, fair, trust, and all of those, it's asking a lot of a researcher to know what those things are and assess the potential repository against those axes. I mean, It kind of seems like, you know, find the domain repository in your field that seems well established, and that's your job, you know, the rest is on the repo.
Yeah, it goes to Abby's point about making sure you frame it so the researcher can see why they're making that choice. And then, yes, you're absolutely right.
And what I'm really taking away there is get rid of the jargon. I mean, we have to turn this into researcher English, not data manager English.
Yeah. Okay, so I think Andrew has an answer.
Well, I'll answer your question, but I think going back to my previous point is, I think a lot of times we get in this mindset that domain-specific repositories are the best, right? They're like,
you're ESIP, my friend.
Well, my current research project is very interdisciplinary, and there's data sets that can't go into domain-specific repositories because they are outside the scope. And so then they have to find somewhere to put it, right?
That's right.
So then the researcher's like, okay, I have a data manager who has a repository, I'm gonna put it there. And they submit to a journal, and this journal says, no, that's not a respectable repository, right?
By the way, tell me which journals are saying that, because I will deal with that.
I can give you a list of some that have been
I have called them up and said, you have to stop saying that.
Yeah.
Yes, I will do that.
I agree, because then what does the researcher do? They just put it in Figshare or put it somewhere with limited metadata, and I could have done a better job for them. I could have provided a better service for them, but my repository is, in their eyes, 1 frowny face or 3 frowny faces, and
okay.
Right?
God. Now the frowny faces have to go.
And so to me, when I'm trying to sell a researcher on sharing their data, right? Citation is always the first place I go to. If I can get you to 3 stars, you've got a DOI, you've got a data set, you've got metadata to support that. It's discoverable, it's accessible, and reusable. Like, that's a huge jump from a researcher that was storing that on a hard drive in their lab, in my eyes. But if you can provide me protocols, code for your analysis, data dictionary for terms you use.
Which repository do you have?
So I manage the University of Idaho's institutional repository.
Oh, nice work.
So in my eyes, that's a 5-star data set. And then I have people that are doing what I consider beyond that, like providing interactive GitHub protocols and then bundling that as a static release so that it can't change over time and people can see what was done at the time of publication, and then as it changes and they republish, do another static release. So
nice.
I feel like this conceptually is a fun exercise, but by the next ESIP, how we rank 5 stars might have changed. Like, there could be a new thing, right? Like, care principles is a new thing. Core trust seal is, and what's the next thing that's gonna make it, right?
Yep.
But I still, in my mind, am stuck. Like, how do I convince a researcher who's not already positively motivated to be a 5-star researcher, because I have those, but how do I convince someone that's complacent at 3 stars to want to go to 5?
Interestingly, that goes directly to the argument why I said, oh no, not CMMI, because 3 is considered absolutely amazing in CMMI for the very reason you just described your situation, where 3 would be great if anyone who's complacent, if you could get them to 3, it's brilliant. And those who are, overachievers will go to 5. It is the same reason. So it'd be interesting to kind of think it through and see what those alignments are. So to bolster your argument, I don't remember the numbers exactly, but we did an analysis of all the data citations within AG's journals, and by and far, in the high 80s, low 90s, our researchers are going to Zenodo, period. So there's no metadata there. You just know it, right? Like, maybe we'll find a few people that are amazing, but there's just no metadata there. And I'm hearing Mark Parsons' voice in my head. Many years ago, he said, listen, Shelley, you realize when you put the journal requirement into place to get a DOI and cite it, you're literally going to send them to generalist repositories, because that is the lowest bar for them to get their paper published. He was absolutely right. So, but again, it's somewhere. So we made it to the first frowny face, it's somewhere, or the second, or maybe the third. And now it's like, how do we get it to be reusable, interoperable? We head down FAIR, and how can we get the repository community to support the researchers? So by and far, domain repositories are not used by our researchers in large. It's Zenodo, literally the Z. Figshare the next, Dryad is down there, and then institutional repositories and domain repositories are the least. How do we flip it? Takes a lot of work to flip it. And should we? There was an argument as to the data doesn't belong in a domain repository. It actually should be in an institutional repository because of the following 10 million reasons. So does flip it make sense? How do we say, if you're doing this kind of research, make sure your domain data goes here, but the rest goes here? There's a complex argument. And I'm glad the recording is on so that we can get these words from Mark.
No, I want to actually go back to you, Andrew. So I agree. I mean, I'm a big fan of domain repositories, but hopefully we're becoming more interdisciplinary, and we don't want to reinforce silos. So if you have a great institutional repository, do you have any certification of that to say that, is there a long-term commitment from the University of Idaho that will keep that maintained? Do you have offsite backups? Do you, all those good practices? And so it seems to me that's what we want, is a well-run, well-managed repository. and with good data, with lots of metadata and so forth. So because you could have crappy data in a good repository, and you could have good data in a crappy repository. So I think that's what we're actually trying to assess. And so it's not that it's a domain thing. And Core Trust Seal is one way to do that, but there's the Trusted Digital Repository certification. There's all sorts of certifications. Or you could even, I think, maybe at some level, I don't know if the journals would buy this, but self-certify. So, but that's, I think, the point is it's a trusted repository that's going to be there, and the data are well described. That's what gets you to 5 stars.
So with that,
I don't want to get an answer to that question. Do you have any sort of certification, or have you thought about that?
Yeah. Normally what happens is we have to write to these journals and show them like our relationships with like Data One and RDA, and I don't know if we necessarily have like a certification, but it might help. Yeah. But there are some journals, and I'll find the last one that I encountered that have a list like only in these repositories are you allowed to publish.
And oh my God, don't get us started on that.
Some of them, you look at their website and you dig into the details, and they've only got 10 years of funding guaranteed. Like, so can I guarantee my repository will last forever? No, but neither can theirs. They're saying they have 10 years of funding, and then, right. So that's where it gets a little frustrating for me, being the little guy,
Yeah.
And
Stick with ESA because we're trying to figure, so, okay, first, just give me a second. So listen, as much as I live within the journal space, it is absolutely wrong for a journal to say, put your data in this repository. Wrong, 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 wrong. They should not be doing that. I know why they're doing that, but I wish they would stop doing that. And if we could give our researchers more empowerment, if we could help the funders with community accepted repository lists and have a way to guide from the team, that's so much better. Okay, I'm done. Gentleman back here.
And can we make that the last question? Because we're like 3 minutes from the end, and I would like to do just a really short
last question.
wrap up.
It's not really a question, more a comment. It seems like, flipping it, as you were kind of saying, it seems like it's the better approach. So support like Andrew's repository and get it up to the standards you need, because it's going to be easier for him to work with his researchers at his university to create then a data set that hits all these other things and have the workshops hosted locally, rather than having a list of all these generic repositories that people are out in the wild trying to find. And maybe that's where ESIP can kind of create that guideline and framework of what that training needs to look like to help like Andrew bridge the gap between his repository and his domain researchers.
Oh, please do join this group. Margaret is our chair. These are the things we talk about all the time. We would absolutely love to get your thoughts on it. Finish up this exercise. And Ruth, you were talking about the larger spreadsheet where we're working on more guidance. And Ruth, I'm just going to hand it back to you because I know you've got the last word.
Well, actually, you said half my last words. Seriously, please join our group. If you're at all interested in these topics, this is exactly what we're talking about. Our next cluster call is on the 3rd Friday of next month at 4 p.m. It's August 19th. And in particular, I would love it if Andrew would show up. Okay, really seriously.
Actually, I could name a few people in this room that were very prolific. So that guy and this person and that woman and that.
Yeah, but I can't see any of them. And so if you capture their names, that would be great. But I would kind of like to figure out what our 3 takeaways are. One of my takeaways is, yep, I was right. This is really fraught. But important. And I'm wondering if other people have thoughts as to what the major takeaways from this particular session should be. I do not think I've heard anything saying this is not a conceptually good idea. It may not be entirely focused quite right yet, but I do think that this is something people are thinking would be important. Can you get the sense of the room if that's true or not?
Yeah, we got a hand up from Madison. Could someone hand Madison the?
So yeah, one of the things that I see as a takeaway I'm hearing is that we need to really focus on how can a researcher get there. So instead of having it be repository focused, like how can a researcher get to a point where they're making things better?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, but there was at least one other thumb from somebody's hand, and in a room of 30 people, that's kind of a small statistic. So hands with thumbs on yay, keep doing this. Ooh, not everybody put their hand up. Okay, so there's some people who are suspicious. So I would say about half the room had thumbs, the rest of them are potentially streaming in another room. So I'm not sure. Get away from the rating. So yeah, Andrew, Abby, can you just grab that and say it so Ruth can hear you?
Yes, I think if you get away from the rating system, because there's feelings that go along with being rated poorly, and there's also sometimes money that goes along with that too. So if you get away from the rating system, I think this is a good idea.
Okay, back to Andrew.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool, getting back to this idea of certifying a repository, if there was a way we developed this as a, like a certified data set, right? Like this data record, regardless of where it's at, but that's essentially what you're doing, right? You're saying this one's 5 stars, so we're giving it the, you did it, good job.
It argues Abby's point, like, oh my gosh, stay away from the rating. There's a whole world working on certifying data sets, which is frightening. Yeah.
But we could just leverage that, because that was my comment on 5, is what does fair mean? Because there's a whole slew of conversations going on to define what fair means, and it's very contextual. But if some trusted entity says, yay, verily, it's fair, that counts.
We could go with that. So leverage other work.
We should leverage every sort of certification that's out there.
Okay.
And be really kind of, what's the term? Sort of agnostic about, so just like you're saying, journals shouldn't specify repositories, we shouldn't specify vocabularies, we shouldn't specify certifications, but we should say you need these things. You have to demonstrate at some level that you've done something good.
Okay, that's a good point. All right, on that, I think it's lunch. It's lunchtime, time to eat. Thanks, everybody.
Great section, everybody.
Nice work, Ruth.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. That was great. Got what I think we needed out of that. I'm going to save the chat.